explanation of where this originated. Apart from the resurrection itself, I cannot find any antecedent cause that would explain why these people sincerely came to believe that Jesus was risen from the dead. So those are the facts, and I think that the best explanation of them is that they were telling the truth, that Jesus was risen. What about the immediate experience of God? He says the brain can be induced to have religious experience. The problem with that argument is the brain can be induced to have experiences of the external world and physical objects. Do we therefore think that the external world is illusory? Does anybody here think that they might be a brain in a vat of chemicals, being stimulated by a mad scientist to believe in the external world that you're here in this lecture hall? Obviously not. His argument leads to skepticism. There are certain kinds of properly basic beliefs, like belief in the external world, or I would argue belief in the existence of God, which is grounded in our immediate experience, and unless he can provide a defeater for that belief, we are rational to entertain and to hold that belief as Christians do.
Obviously, I'm not going to be able to cover all these points, so we'll just go in order in what Dr. Craig said in the last few minutes. Starting with his first remarks. Again, notice, please, that most of his talk actually does not apply to the Christian God. It's just a general argument for the existence of a variety of gods, and that was not the topic tonight, but I'll be very glad to debate that with him one other time. So the original universe stuff is not relevant. One of the things that I'd like you to notice is that he kept citing Fred Hoyle. Fred Hoyle is a cosmologist and astrophysicist. He also got the very unusual distinction of getting a special prize from the British Astronomical Society for the highest number of wrong hypotheses proposed in a scientific career, which is unusual. It's a typical British thing to do. I mean, who else would give a prize of that sort? And they actually meant it seriously, because they meant it as, this guy, although he was repeatedly wrong, he actually spurred a lot of good research in order to prove him wrong. Now, these are the argument, of course, of the origin of the universe and where did it come from. I still don't understand. I talked to Dr. Craig several times before, and this might be obviously my personal limitation, but I don't understand how postulating a God actually solves anything. It seems to me that you fall into one of two traps. You either fall into an infinite regress, which he abhors. He said there's no infinity out there, because one can immediately ask, well, who created God? How did that God come about? And then you say, well, there was super God. And how did super God come in? Well, there was super God. And, obviously you go on forever. Or it becomes all of a sudden an Aristotelian, talking about a position that has been actually not following philosophy for thousands of years at this point. And it tells you that, well, there must have been an original cause that was uncaused. I'm not sure that actually means anything outside of philosophical mumbo-jumbo, but it is interesting to see that actual quantum physicists have a very similar explanation, except that they can back it up with empirical evidence. They do actually have pretty good theories about how things literally come out of nothing. The fine-tuning of the universe, which again is not really that relevant to the discussion tonight, Dr. Craig was referring to the so-called anthropic principle, the idea that the universe is so fine-tuned and the only explanation possible is that it was fine-tuned to bring about this debate tonight, for example. And which is a pretty twisted way of creating a universe, if you ask me. Now, he played the probability game. I don't have time to get into probability game, but a very good mathematician and probability theorist, Martin Gardner, actually went through these kind of games and defined the anthropic principle as the completely ridiculous anthropic principle, or crap for short. And so I'll leave it at that for the anthropic principle. Incidentally, even if, and I'm not granted this at all, but even if science will never find out the origin, a satisfactory answer to the origin of the universe or to the origin of creation or whatever you want to call it, that all amounts to say that we don't know. So what? I mean, Craig seems to think that he wins by default. You don't know, therefore. But it doesn't work that way. If we were having this debate 2,000 years ago, Dr. Craig would probably try to convince us all that lightning and thunder outside of the hole, which is not happening, would be an obvious indication of the fact that Zeus is upset with us, and probably most of us would actually believe it. Because there was no theory of atmospheric physics at the time. So all he's making is an argument from ignorance. And one of those things that science is very good is at debunking argument from ignorance. Next week Nature might publish an article explaining to Dr. Craig where did all these things come from. About the objective moral values that he equates with the existence of God, I think that Dr. Roos is right when he says that morality is adaptive. Now, Dr. Craig then jumps on and says, well, but that makes it an illusion. There's nothing illusory about an adaptation. My hand is an adaptation, and it's not illusory. If you want to try, I can slap you, and you'll see that there's nothing illusory about this thing. Also, Dr. Craig used the word, it just means, just helps survival and reproduction, with just in scare quotes probably, if we could have seen the little cartoon coming out of his head. Well, why is that that survival is such and reproduction is such a lowly thing? I mean, it seems to me that if something is important for survival and reproduction of not only human beings but a variety of species that are related to us, that doesn't make it quite a secondary point. Survival and reproduction is it's got a lot to do with the life of every living being, including humans. There's this famous cartoon that asks what is the meaning of life, and there are a bunch of different animals, each one of which has a little cartoon on their head that says, eat, sleep, reproduce, and it moves up through the scale of complexity of life, and then it gets to humans, and humans, instead of having eat, sleep, reproduce, asking this question, what is the meaning of life? Eat, sleep, reproduce. For example, it's a good beginning. It might not be the end of it, but it's a good beginning. So if we can explain that in terms of the value of morality, it seems that that's a lot. Dr. Craig also confuses objectivity with universality. I said that some moral rules are objective. That does not make them universal, and he seems to confuse these two categories over and over. Then I'll ask a question to Dr. Craig, which I really will genuinely like to have an answer, because I asked this question to several people and I never got a satisfactory answer. Is God good by nature, because there is a good that is, in fact, transcends even God himself? Or is what God wants the good? How do you define that? It seems that you could get in trouble either way, so I'll let you pick, and then maybe we'll come back to that in the rebuttal. About the historical Jesus, there is no consensus of whatsoever among historians. New Testament scholars are a very small subset of historians, quote unquote, and they tend to have their own ideological agendas, most of them. Plus, there is no consensus at all, and Dr. Craig actually should know better than that, because there's quite a bit of articles that have been written in rebuttal to his own arguments about the historicity of Jesus, and I can provide anybody who wants to email me with plenty of references to that. So that to me shows that there is no consensus at all, and so what he's claiming is essentially not correct. Let's see, what else do I have here? Okay, I covered this again. Dr. Craig at the beginning of his rebuttal said that I granted most of his arguments. I thought he wasn't listening, really. I didn't think that I granted anything at all. But maybe we can go back to the tape and reanalyze the whole shebang. Okay. He says that I have not provided any way to falsify the belief in God, or in the Christian God in particular, which, remember, was the topic for tonight. I'm not sure what he means in terms of falsification. I know what the term means as applied to science and empirical evidence. As applied to stories about supernatural beings, it's much less clear. He's fond of quoting that article that I wrote for Skeptic magazine a few years ago, saying that, he quotes me as saying that you can falsify the existence of God. But that's not really what I said. If he had read actually the whole article, he would find that I was saying that you can falsify certain specific claims about the physicality of the universe, which are found in biblical or other sacred texts. So, for example, you can falsify that there was or was not a Noah's flood or things of that sort, but not the metaphysical claim of the existence of any God. So I'm not sure where he got that one. However, the question I'd like to ask you is, do you need a positive argument not to believe in, say, leprechauns or Santa Claus? Or do I just need to make an argument that whatever reason you provide me for believing in Santa Claus can be debunked pretty easily? You say, hey, I found the toys under the tree last Christmas. Yes, but there is such a thing as a toy industry, and actually your father has a credit card, and here's the statement. It shows on your credit card, on your father's credit card. So that's a pretty good explanation of a piece of empirical evidence. Do I really need to demonstrate that there is no Santa Claus? No, of course I cannot demonstrate that there is no Santa Claus. You cannot demonstrate that there is things that you cannot touch, you cannot see. They don't have any effect on the physical world outside of what Dr. Craig was saying. So I don't think that the falsifiability argument is very strong, in fact, strong at all. You define morality as an ephemeral product of evolution. Well, let's see. If we're talking about the kind of moral rules that are common between humans and chimpanzees, that's as ephemeral as 6 million years. I don't know if you guys have an idea what 6 million years is, but it's a long time. I don't call that as ephemeral. And it's probably much longer than that because we don't know anything, of course, of the behavior of extinct fossil species that existed related to primates. Now, then he asked, what if you want to be destructively asocial? You can do that, and we'll lock you up. That's why it is wrong to be destructively asocial, because most people wouldn't go for it, and therefore you're going to be locked up. Why do you think we have prisons and structures of that sort? Because it is not okay within a society to be destructively asocial. You can be asocial in a non-destructive way. There's nothing wrong with that. About the Holocaust, it's interesting that we keep throwing at each other Hitler here. I put it on the slide, and then you mentioned the Holocaust and things of that sort. Dr. Craig, during our last debate, mentioned, which is available on both of our websites, actually went so far as claiming that Hitler was a good example of what an atheist belief can do. And he should know better than that, because Hitler was not an atheist at all. As a matter of fact, he was a Christian. He was helped by the Catholic Church, who notoriously and historically didn't have a particularly high sympathy for the Jews. So I'm not sure where he gets this Holocaust stuff. His Holocaust history. But anyway, the Bible does condone genocide in a variety of circumstances, in a variety of passages. And those passages that I quoted, plus many more that are available, are not actually taken out of context. But don't trust me or Dr. Craig. Just take your Bible, go home, and read it, open it, those passages or others that you can find easily. And then decide for yourself if those passages tell you something or not about the morality of biblical beliefs. It is also definitely not true that there were no other messiahs or virgin births or resurrections or things of that sort that had occurred in antiquity or allegedly occurred in antiquity, and they were known to the Jews at the time of Jesus. This is simply historically false. It's very easy to back up if you pick up any book on mythology. And of course, he says that the Gospels are not. The mythology is not a good parallel and good tools for analyzing the Gospels well, because he believes already that the Gospels are in fact an historical document. But this begs the question. The question is, are the Gospels an historical document, or are in fact a mix and match of different kinds of mythologies with a little more new things invented and put in place? And I suggest that the much simpler explanation is in fact the latter. Again, things like the empty tomb and the people saw Jesus after his death. We have plenty of examples of similar miracles before, during, and after. And I don't see why we should believe one set of miracles and not another. I really don't see any reason for it, and I would like Dr. Craig to tell me something about it. And as I said already in my presentation, he seems to equate the truth of a belief with the willingness to die for that belief, no matter how novel that belief is. There's plenty of people that all of a sudden are converted to novel beliefs. And by the way, even though the belief in the resurrection was in fact new for the Jews, was not new for many of the surrounding populations and cultures, which is where they got it from. Thank you.
We will now go into the second set of rebuttals, lasting 8 minutes for each debater.
I think it's remarkable that in tonight's debate we have still yet to hear any evidence to falsify the God hypothesis. In his last speech, Dr. Pigliucci said, we don't have to have a positive argument to believe that God doesn't exist. Look at Santa Claus. We don't need a positive argument not to believe in him. I would submit on the contrary. Anytime you make a claim that something doesn't exist, that is a claim to knowledge, and therefore you have a burden of proof to justify it. Scott Shalkowski, in his article in the American Philosophical Quarterly of 1989, makes this point very well. He says the reason